IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Wednesday, October 2nd. Trevor, and I'm kind of enjoying this Wednesday because, Notre Dame needed a break mentally and physically. And I needed a little bit of a break as well.
Yeah.
It hasn't been much of a break. I needed a break from prepping for another opponent and just allow me to focus just on Notre Dame. First of the month is always busy and crazy, insanely busy for me as a business owner because people need to get paid, which means I need to figure out how much people need to get paid and all this other kind of stuff. It is crazy. So I've been to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning the last couple of days, but I am here. I am ready to roll, and I'm ready to talk some Notre Dame football, man. So I apologize to everyone. We're getting a little bit later start than normal. I've been on the phone the last hour with a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff going on in the recruiting world. Can't really talk about it, won't be dropping it on the board, but one thing we do expect to happen here soon, another thing may happen soon. It's crazy. It's crazy, Trevor, but I'm ready to talk about some different type of recruiting. So today we're going to have two shows. We're going to do number one. We are going to break down the commitment of Antavious Richardson, who goes by the nickname Scrap, which I kind of like. There's a lot of nicknames that kids have that I am not a big fan of. And it's just like, yeah, but Scrap, that's like, okay, that's the kind of kid you want. I don't know what it means, but in my head, I've convinced myself I know what it means and I like it. He committed to Notre Dame yesterday during the show, actually. So we're going to break down his commitment in the way that we always do. And then once we're done with that, we are then going to have our buy, sell, hold. I promised you guys last week that this week's buy, sell, hold would not be a 5-hour show. But you guys had a lot of great submissions. I'm pretty confident it won't be a 5-hour show, but Trevor, we still have a lot of great submissions that we get to. So I'm excited about it, man. And this is going to be your first recruiting breakdown. Second buy, sell, hold, but first recruiting breakdown, man. So I'm ready to roll.
I'm excited, man. It's going to be a good day. Second buy, sell, hold. It was a 5-hour long show last time, but I had a really good time. It's an awesome break during my week because right now I'm in the middle of moving. And I'm sure anybody in the chat, and Brian, I know you understand that moving is just a hassle. No matter where you're moving to, no matter what you're doing, I'm a little sore, but it's okay. I'm excited to talk some ball today, man. I'm ready to get after it.
Today we're going to have some fun talking about this, Trevor. I'm excited about this recruitment, and we're gonna dive into it because this is sort of the, when you missed out on the recruits that you wanted at receiver. They made some choices about guys they didn't go after that I didn't love. Then they went after some guys that I wasn't very high on. Fortunately, in my opinion, they missed on a couple of those guys. Sometimes it's, you miss on a guy and you look back, you're like, yeah, that worked out pretty well because you ended up getting this kid over here. And you talk about a lot of frustration with receiver recruiting, and I said, well, look, I had a problem with their plan. I think their plan wasn't good. I think there were some players that they should have gone after that they didn't go after, and all that. Cooper Perry and Dalen McCutcheon and guys like that they flat out should have gone after, but they made those choices. So then the question is, okay, well, receiver recruiting is screwed. Well, okay, let's wait to see who they get first. And that's kind of where Notre Dame is they're in the, okay, this didn't go the way we wanted it, but how are we going to finish? How are we going to recover? I remember not too long ago, Notre Dame wanted a running back named Will Shipley, who I think was a very good college running back. And Will Shipley is a good football player. And I think Will Shipley would have been even more effective in college running behind the Notre Dame offensive line than he did behind the Clemson offensive line. And that was a big loss. They put all their eggs in that basket. Yeah. Well, they're screwed at running back. Okay, well, let's see how they recover. And they went out and got Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. That's pretty good recovery, because as much as I liked Will Shipley in Notre Dame, he would have been just fine at Notre Dame. And we wouldn't have thought about it. He was a really good football player. Well, Audric Estime turned out, in my opinion, to be even better than Will Shipley was, at least from a production standpoint. Now, we could argue would Audric have done as much at Clemson, but it's irrelevant. He chose Clemson. Audric chose Notre Dame, and Audric was really flipping good at Notre Dame. And so it worked out. And we've seen situations like that before, Trevor, where they've missed on a guy, and you don't spin it like, oh, it's good that they missed on that. No, I wanted Will Shipley. I liked Will Shipley. I was bummed when they got him. But the question is always, okay, what do you do next? And now Notre Dame has kind of taken their next step in what do you do next? And it's been interesting, Trevor, because you have two commitments from Jerome Bettis and Elijah Burris, and then they basically dropped Sean Terry. And so you're down at 2, and you're like, okay, what are you going to do? Well, what Notre Dame did was they went out and identified 3 to 4 early players. 2 of them they've really zeroed in on. Actually, 3 of them, it was actually 5. 3 of them they decided to really zero in on. It was Jalen Cooper, Isaiah Mizell, and of course, Scrap Richardson, who is now committed to Notre Dame. And so he was one of the players that was picked up on by Notre Dame when they had their miss on Derek Meadows and some of those other guys. They said, okay, we're going to turn our attention here. And I got to tell you, Trevor, I fell in love with the kid right away. I know that there were some people at Notre Dame that were incredibly high on him. There's two receivers, I won't say which ones, that the people I talked to are super high on, and he was one of them. And there's a lot of people that believe he's a hidden gem. There was a little bit of nervousness. Notre Dame kind of thought they were going to get Antavious for a while, and then Bama got involved. And so that's kind of the backstory there. This kid was initially committed to Georgia State. Then he flipped to South Florida because he got bigger offers at that level. And then, of course, in the last couple months, Notre Dame's offered, Bama's offered, Louisville's offered, Duke has offered, North Carolina's offered, schools like that have offered. And when Bama got involved, I think there was a little bit of, okay, let's see how this plays out. The interesting thing, Trevor, and this tells you what kind of player that this kid is, it came down to it where they weren't saying, well, why would you pick going to play receiver at Bama over playing Notre Dame? Well, he didn't, because he wasn't being recruited to play receiver at Alabama. He was recruited to play defensive back. That's he's a quarterback and a DB who Notre Dame's recruiting to play receiver. Bama was recruiting to play DB, and ultimately he decided he wanted to play offense. And so he visited Bama the week before he visited Notre Dame. He was supposed to go back for another Bama visit, which kind of tells you a little bit about Bama's interest in him. They were trying to get him back on campus, but ultimately he decided to commit to Notre Dame. So this is a huge, huge pickup. But it just kind of, if you like versatile athletes, the fact that Notre Dame just landed a receiver that they beat Bama for, and Bama was recruiting to play DB, tells you a lot about what you need to know about the kind of athlete that Antavious Richardson is.
First and foremost, I think it starts to tell you how competitive Notre Dame truly is on the recruiting trail. And since the start of Marcus Freeman's tenure, we've learned a lot about how he can recruit at a high level. And some of the bigger misses have been in the wide receiver room, right? Now, starting to pick up traction there, getting Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams and Logan Saldate. And this win over Bama with Antavious is huge for a multitude of reasons. One, Brian, to your point, Alabama was really interested in him. And in years past, Alabama was kind of that bully on the block when it came to recruiting, right? The second Alabama kind of stepped foot into the room, it was like, oh, all right, here we go. Kind of reminds me of that scene from The Blind Side when the Tennessee coach comes in to see Michael Orr play. It's like, oh, he's here. All right, let's just pack up and go home, right? So it's nice to see how competitive Notre Dame is being on that front. But I'm really excited to see what Antavious is going to do in South Bend. One, I think the deciding factor for him, and you hit the nail on the head, was dude is electric with the ball in his hand. And I think that's one of the reasons why he chose Notre Dame over Alabama, because he was going to get that opportunity. He was an electric athlete on both sides of the field, don't get me wrong. But his speed, his quickness, his athleticism, just it screams, yo, get the ball in my hands. Give me the football. And that is something that Notre Dame needs a lot more of on offense. Can't wait to see what he does when he gets to South Bend, Brian.
So when you talk about the class impact for Scrap Richardson, it really starts with, okay, how does he fit into the receiving situation? So number one is numbers. Well, Notre Dame's had two receivers committed. You had Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr., and Notre Dame wanted minimum. 3 was the minimum you did not fail meeting your numbers need. The goal, the desire was always 4, at least 4. I could see a scenario in where they go to 5 if the right players want to come, but 4's the target number. So this gets you one step closer to your target number of 4. So that's number one. It's a win right there just from a number standpoint. Now, number 2, what kind of player are you adding? Are you meeting any needs with the type of player you're recruiting? And when you look at last year's recruiting class, and then you look at the year before's recruiting class, the guys that are still there, Notre Dame has some vertical players. Cam Williams is a vertical player. Micah Gilbert's a vertical player. Jaden Greathouse is a vertical player. What I mean by vertical player is not necessarily in the traditional burner sense, but more of they're guys that are working down the field. This is a kid that can bring some of that. I think Logan Saldate's got a little bit of, he can work vertically and laterally. I think KK Smith can do a little bit of that, but for the most part, you got a lot of vertical guys. You got guys that do damage. Ideally, are going to do damage running down the field. They're going to do damage getting open on routes. This is a kid that we don't know what kind of route runner he's going to be because I've never seen him run a route. But when you look at why you're recruiting him because he's got really good football speed. And 10.68 and 100-meter dash is pretty good speed. It's not like elite burner speed. That's pretty good speed. But you're bringing a kid that's really electric with the ball in his hands, as you mentioned, Trevor. And so that's a skill set they wanted. To me, this is essentially, it comes down to this. You drop Sean Terry. For full disclosure, not everyone at Notre Dame was on board necessarily taking Sean Terry when they took Sean Terry. There were some people that wanted him and others that didn't because they just felt, okay, it's a little early and, let's see what other kind of players are out there. Well, it ended up working out because this is the guy you're recruiting to replace Sean Terry. The first thing that they're going to do with Antavious Richardson, from what I'm told, is the plan as of right now. Things can change between now and in August or when he shows up or if he's an early enrollee. I'm not sure which one of those is going to be the case. But you've got a kid that they first project as a slot in this offense. Now, ultimately, Mike Denbrock wants to get to the point where guys play everywhere. We saw that at LSU, Trevor, where you never knew where Malik Neighbors was going to line up, and he'd like to get there. And this kid at 6'2" can bring a lot of Z to the table, depending on how he fills out. There's some things you could do with him in a boundary look, but where they like him is in that slot position because of how Mike Denbrock wants to use a slot position. You have to understand what the slot position is in Mike Denbrock's offense. Yes, there's an element of screen game, bubbles, quick slants, but Mike Denbrock uses the slot to work the vertical parts a lot as well. The slot fades, the seam routes, the crossers, the overs, things like that, where you want to get a guy kind of chasing. The other part of it, too, is when you look at the makeup of the other guys that they're recruiting, which we'll get into later, it also fits in well there. So they like the fact that he brings a lot to the table that they like in the slot, but more importantly, they wanted to get away from guys that can only do one thing. And the reality is Sean Terry, even if you think he was a great player, he was very limited. He was a niche type of guy. He was going to do this type of thing in your offense at 5'9" and what he could do. This is a kid that you could say, look, we like him in the slot, and they like him in the slot. But if another player emerges from the slot, you can easily put him back outside and say he can fit outside. That was important for Notre Dame, that they land someone that can be that type of slot player, but also someone that has the versatility to do what Mike Denbrock ultimately wants to do, which is move guys around. And you don't always know where guys are going to be. So when you talk about the class impact, Trevor, he fits the positional need. He gives you numbers, but he brings a skill set you're trying to get more and more and more of, which is give me more receivers that are dangerous once the ball is in their hands. Yes, he's stretched the field up, but can you do damage when the ball's in your hands? And that's certainly something that this young man brings to the table.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't have much more to add here, Brian, but you're absolutely right. It starts to create a little bit of diversity in the wide receiver room because in comparison, Notre Dame's taking the proper steps, right? Some of it is yet to be showcased on the field this year, but I do believe that from a skill set standpoint, Notre Dame's wide receiving core this year is more diverse than the tools that they had in it last year. Adding a guy like Antavious Richardson to this upcoming class will just start to add more to what Mike Denbrock has in his arsenal out at wide receiver. If there's one thing that Notre Dame has lacked from the wide receiver position year over year is it's been a dynamic playmaker. So I love the addition of Antavious Richardson, man. It's going to be a good it's going to be another really good athlete who can do things after the catch with the ball in his hands. We talked about it yesterday. Notre Dame needs to find more ways to have their receivers get more yards after the catch and start helping Riley Leonard pad some of those passing yard stats and start moving the ball down the field and making people miss and get people chasing. And Antavious Richardson is definitely a guy that can do that. So, again, really excited, man. Really excited to see him here.
And when you think about the direction of the quarterback position, obviously Mike Denbrock likes guys that can run if they're there. But when you think about Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr, those are pass-first guys. And so you need receivers that can also get down the field. You mentioned it right there, Trevor. That was an important piece because you're not going to be just an RPO-based offense with a read zone quarterback like you are now. even if Deuce Knight ends up at Notre Dame, and you guys all know my stance on whether or not I think he's going to end up at Notre Dame. I'll believe it on, was it December 5th, whatever that may be. I'll believe when his signature comes in, I'll say, okay, cool, he's going to Notre Dame. But even him, the ultimate goal with Deuce is to turn him into more of a dual threat quarterback that's a passer first, runner second. You know what I mean? Like, yes, he's a dynamic runner, but Notre Dame does not intend, from my understanding, does not see Deuce like the next, what we see from Riley Leonard right now. They want it to be what they thought they were going to get from Riley Leonard, which is a guy that can drop back, throw the football, be effective in the throwing game. Oh, and by the way, he's a really dynamic runner. And then, of course, Noah Grubbs in the 2016 class or 2026 class. They want to be able to drop back and throw the football. And I do believe that there's a desire to get a little bit more length in the receiver room as well. So you went from a slot that's listed at 5'10" that I don't think is 5'10". I'm sorry. I've seen Sean Terry. Maybe he's 5'10", maybe. To now you're getting a guy that's 6'2" and is more of a modern type of a pro style slot, as opposed to sort of the college spread slot that Sean Terry was. And so I think that's helpful as well when you talk about the class impact. So met your numbers need, Trevor, added a skill set you wanted, and there's a positional fit for the guy that can be there. And look, I'm also curious to see just how much he fills out, because he's a pretty strong kid, even though he's skinny. And when you play quarterback and DB, you can see that part of his game. I'm curious to see how much he's going to fill out now once he starts playing one sport, because he's one of those kids that plays sport. He plays basketball in the winter. Runs track in the spring. Once he starts kind of just playing one sport, I'm curious to see what he's going to, what kind of player what kind of body he's going to develop into. And maybe there's some ability for him to even play at times in the boundary. So that's another part of his evolution, is I know where they see him now, but I love the fact that he doesn't have to only play that. How the roster shakes out can develop it, but also how his skill set shakes out is going to develop that. So very interesting player. So Trevor, are you ready to dive into some film? You ready
Always.
to break down some film with this young man? Let's get to it, man. So we're gonna look at the film of Antavious Richardson, and then we're gonna dive into sort of a what's next type of situation, and then we'll get into our buy sell hold. So Trevor, let's bring up this film now of Antavious, and you guys are gonna see. Here's what I'm telling you: you're not gonna see. You're not going to see catch a single pass, and you're not going to see him run a single route, but you're going to see him with the ball in his hands. And I mean, there's things he catches snaps and he catches punts and those type of things. But, this is a young man that doesn't necessarily bring proven receiver ability to the table. You're projecting. And as someone who played quarterback throughout his high school career and then started as a true freshman at wide receiver, it's not as hard of a transition as you might think. But you see right there, Trevor, just on this kick return, that this is a kid with vision. This is a kid that has some suddenness to him as an athlete. This is a young man that is elusive, and that's something that Notre Dame looks for. He's a long strider. You see that there. He's a guy that can make people miss in space, and I love the fact he's a quarterback, because quarterbacks, even guys who don't throw a ton, and he doesn't throw a ton, you got to have some level of football IQ.
Yeah.
And some level of leadership and some level of vision of the football field to play quarterback. And you kind of see it from him as a runner here. And Trevor, this is a perfect example of a guy that's just smart, sees the field, finds that crease, and then uses his athleticism to hit it. And then he makes a big play with it.
He's very explosive once he finds that crease too, which is something really promising that you would look for in a slot wide receiver. Look, if anybody needs to know how good of an athlete this guy is, Brian and I both played quarterback back in the day. I can confidently say, I don't know about you, Brian. I can confidently say that I was on no side of kick return. So
I was a pretty good athlete. So I returned punts and kicks. And like I said, I started as a true freshman. I moved to receiver at the end of my freshman year, and I went against Shenard Newby, who played at UVA my first game as a receiver, and I caught 5 balls on him. He did beat me for a 70-yard touchdown, but I fell. I tipped the ball and then fell, and he caught it. And then my second game as a receiver, I scored 5 touchdowns, 4 receiving and 1 pick six. So we were a little different type of athlete playing quarterback back in high school, Trevor. So, but your point stands. Most quarterbacks are. CJ Carr wasn't on that. Noah Grubbs isn't on that.
Yeah.
Right. So your point stands. I'm just not a good example for that.
Well, hey, no worries. That's awesome. I did not know that. Listen, in
I know
another
I don't
life,
look
I
like
wish
it
I
now,
could.
but I used to be kind of fast and athletic. I know I look like a nose guard now, but it wasn't always the case.
No, you're all right. I look like Ben Roethlisberger right now in the latter part of his career. So look, I hear you, man. You're all good. But no, this goes to show you how dynamic of an athlete Antavious Richardson can be. That was actually a really accurate pass as well. I mean, he's
Yeah.
somebody that, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record with this kid, but Notre Dame needs more guys who have that mentality of, I just need the ball in my hands. And he has that here. Somebody that is willing to go out, play on kick return. He is tucking and running. He has really
This
good
is him
ball
playing
carrying
defense right
vision.
here.
Yeah.
But yeah, keep going, Trevor.
Yeah, and he's somebody that Notre Dame needs in their wide receiver room to add depth. And I'm not saying that they don't have that right now. I'm not staking the claim that Notre Dame has zero guys who demand the football and can be that guy. But again, like we talked about before, he's somebody that can add diversity to your receiving room.
Mm-hmm.
It helps hit your depth from a numbers perspective. So really excited to see another dynamic athlete added to this room, not just, you know, a bigger 6'5", 6'4" tall guy or just a 5'9" slot guy. He's Antavious Richardson, just especially depending on how he fills out, looks like a guy that could do a lot.
I like this one. I mean, the last play too, Trevor. You see his suddenness.
Mm-hmm.
He's not like, oh my gosh, like that's crazy. He's more smooth than he is like crazy
Mm-hmm.
sudden, and so it can kind of mask how kind of quick he does, change direction. And you see the toughness there. I mean, that's the thing. Like, look, this is a quarterback. I mean, that's kind of thing. Yeah, it's quick, but you got physicality. Can you play the physical part of the game? And you're seeing that right there. And you see this right here again. Look at the change of direction, which for a tall kid is pretty unique in my opinion. You don't see a lot of 6'2" kids that kind of change direction like that. He's got a little bit of that lankiness to him. And he brings a lot to the table, man. Here's another play of him playing defense and coming downhill and drilling a running back in the backfield. Like there's, and I know for a fact that like Mike Mickens, for example, on defense loves two-way players. Like
Yeah.
he loves, and not every kid. Like Benjamin Morrison played a little receiver, but he wasn't a big time two-way player. Jaden Mickey wasn't a two-way player. Not every kid is a two-way player, but that's a bonus. That's brownie points for him when you're recruiting two-way players because you have guys that understand the other side of the ball. You know what DBs think. You know what those guys think. Same thing on the other side. If you played wide receiver, like Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary have been very successful high school receivers, running backs. Dallas don't know about everything. They kind of know what's in the mind of a receiver because they have to be that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, he brings a lot of that, but I love the toughness that he brings to the table on top of the fact that because he's a kind of a skinny kid, but like look at him taking on this block. He's multiple snaps like this where he just comes up and just kind of throws his body into a guy, and then you see him chase the guy down and knock the ball out. So he brings a lot of that to the table. You see size. Well, I shouldn't say size. You see length. You see athleticism. You see some burst. You see some ability to stretch the field. You see toughness. Like look at him there as a runner. Bounce. I mean, bounces off. Okay, bounces off that tackle. Makes that guy miss. Makes that guy miss. Then he bounces off that guy's tackle. Then he runs through that guy, and they finally bring him down at the 7-yard line. Like this isn't a kid who's just athletic. This is a kid that brings a lot of playmaking ability to the table, as we mentioned, and you guys can see that. And he's playing in Georgia. In his league isn't like the big league, but they play some good teams. And so he's playing against other good athletes, and that's something that you like to see as well. And I'm always a big fan of getting more kids out of the state of Georgia. I think that's an ascending state when it comes to producing big-time football players. Yeah. And this is another example of that. So here's more of him playing defense, reading the bubble screen, good pursuit, brings the guy down in space. And, yeah, I mean, look at the patience there. Reading the play, knows his job. He's got to make sure the ball doesn't get outside of him, does a nice job of that, and then ends up making the tackle. So we've seen this kid make plays as a kick returner. We've seen this kid make plays at quarterback as a runner. There he is taking a muff snap and making a play out of it. We've seen him throw the ball down the field. We've seen him come up and make tackles. We've seen him force fumbles. We've seen him break tackles. I mean, when you talk about a Trevor, like what position does he play? It's like this kid's a football player. You figure that out. And the other thing too is, let's just say Notre Dame gets loaded at wide receiver and he's 7th or 8th on the depth chart, and you've got a need at safety or a need at corner. You're like, hey man, you can go over there and play right now. And if he's willing to do that, you've got a kid that can do that. And I always like kids like that. Always like kids like that. And I mean, brings a little bit to the table of what you were getting from the Robinson kid that went to Washington, who you liked at receiver, but other schools like the DB and a guy that, hey, he could do that if the need ever arose. He brings a little bit of that to the table as well.
He's such a smooth runner for somebody that's 6'2". I mean, it's really impressive to watch. He does a really good job of sinking his hips and keep his shoulders over his toes. Like when he's making a cut, like a lot of times with a guy that tall and like that lanky, cuts aren't always as smooth as what they look like. They run pretty stand up. So
usually a little tight hipped.
Yep.
And he's not really, I mean, a tad, but overall, I mean, this is a kid that changes direction with like, look at that move right there, Trevor. Like, let's run that one back here real quick. Just how quickly he's able to, he catches the snap right there, right? Scrambling, makes an immediate vertical cut. That's quick move number one. That also requires vision. Then he makes a move there, but then look at that, setting that guy up. Look at this cut down the field, like boom, and he's just right out of that cut and accelerating again. And that's stuff like that I like. And then he runs into a guy and he's dragging 4 guys. Like they literally don't tackle him on the play. It takes 4 guys to grab him and he doesn't go down. Like, and now you see why he's not playing quarterback. Like, he's not a quarterback. He's just the best player on his high school football team. Like
he's a guy that needs the football in his hands.
Right. Exactly. That's smart coaching, honestly.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, by his high school team is like, this is by far our best football player. Let's just put him in a position where he's touching the ball every single time the ball snapped. So you guys see a little bit of Antavious Richardson, and I think you guys can see why there's a lot of people on him. I have a friend of mine who's he's almost 60 now, and he's been breaking out high school film since he was a teenager. And he's as he's gotten older, he's gotten a little crankier, and he's just harder to please him. And from day one, he's like, this is, of all the offers, this is the kid that I want. That's the kid that I want. I mean, he was super high on him. Talked to one of my sources on the other side of this conversation at ND, and it's just like that. Like when he was, I don't even know how he was discovered. I haven't gotten that backstory yet. But as soon as they made the transition and he kind of got on the board, there were some people that were immediately like, get him. And then there's another kid that people are that way about as well. So, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about him in the class at some point in time as well down the road. So a big pickup for Notre Dame. Let's talk about what's next, Trevor, because as I mentioned, Notre Dame would like to get essentially what I was told is that Notre Dame is going to add 3 more receivers. This is before Scrap committed. They're going to add 3. They'd like to add ideally 3 more receivers to the roster, whether that's 1 high school kid and 2 transfers, 2 high school kids and 1 transfer, or 3 high school kids. That's the goal. Now 4 is where they really need to be. And this gets you closer to the 4. I'm actually, as long as you keep the guys you have, I'm actually okay with 4 and not necessarily adding a transfer and you get 1 more high school kid. But the portal is certainly part of the conversation. There's still more room for high school kids. And so let's talk about what's next at that position. And we'll kind of begin with visits and kind of the lineup for visits. So the first young man to look at for Notre Dame is Isaiah Mizell, who visited this past weekend from Florida. Reminds me a lot of Scrap, actually, as far as similar body type, taller, skinnier. He's not as tall as Scrap. He's committed to Arizona, and he's faster, but he's faster. So he's not as tall, but like the body type is similar, is I guess where I'm getting to the similarities between Isaiah Mizell and Scrap Richardson. Is very similar body type, skinny, taller, long-legged type of kid. Scrap Richardson's more of an after the catch, dynamic with the ball in his hands. Mizell, to me, is more of a line him up at Z and run fast vertical routes. I mean, that's kind of his thing, is he can do some things after the catch, but you're getting a guy that's really fast. And I believe he's a 10-4. Let me go look at that. I want to look up. If I remember correctly, I believe Isaiah Mazel was a 10.4 guy in the 100-meter dash, but I'm not. Yeah, 10.49 is his fastest time in the 100-meter dash, which is really fast, and he's consistently in the 10.6, 10.7 range. So very, very dynamic athlete, but more of a vertical player. So he'd be a bit of a compliment to a guy like him. Now, talked to somebody last night about Isaiah Mizell. He likes Notre Dame a lot, Trevor, and can definitely see himself at Notre Dame. However, there's a lot of big-time schools ramping their interest up on him. And as of today, or I should say as of last night, and I was having this conversation about midnight, the plan for him is to get out and see more places. Just fine. Notre Dame's okay with that. They understood that. They knew that when he came and visited. So they're going to stay on him and keep recruiting him. But they did a great job with his visit. I mean, nailed the visit last week. He could see himself at Notre Dame, fit in really well with the players, and Notre Dame did a great job with their pitch to him. So he's receiver number one. Have you had a chance to see Isaiah Mizell yet, Trevor?
I watched some of his film. I haven't dug too deep into him yet. Just popped off the page when I saw that in 2023 he had 21 receiving touchdowns, which I think was a school record for them. So that's what caught my eye. But everything that I noticed was exactly what you had brought up. He's really fast. He is somebody that Notre Dame would use to stretch the field vertically. Now, we talked about it before of what the quarterback room is going to start to look like for Notre Dame as well. And that would start to line up with when you have guys like Mizell and Richardson coming into their own. But in short, yeah, I've seen a little bit of Mizell, and he's very fast, very fast.
You always can. You can always add guys. Always be okay adding guys with that kind of speed.
Mm-hmm.
Another player on the board for Notre Dame, and this is really where a lot of the focus is right now, of the guys that we'll actually mention, is another guy on the board. There's they talked to, like, I think the Brown kid who's committed to UCLA. They're not on him anymore. Raiden Vines Bright's a kid that they've looked at. Hasn't really gone too far right now. He's still committed to Washington. But the other guy that Notre Dame is really making a move on, and they're going to get him on campus next weekend, is SMU commit Jalen Cooper, who plays at Steele High School in Cibolo, Texas. This is my top receiver on the board of the new offers, and kind of has been. I really like Scrap Richardson, but the difference between Scrap and Jalen Cooper, primary number one, is Jalen Cooper dominates at wide receiver in Texas at a very high level. And, as I was having a conversation with somebody today, and I said, look, I understand the desire to add speed, and obviously that's important, but Notre Dame can't afford to also ignore the fact that they need guys that know how to play football. And this kid knows how to play football. I mean, you're talking about a kid that last year, Trevor, had 63 catches for 1,578 yards and 23 touchdowns. So they went to the state championship game, lost the state championship game. So I think he played 15 games. He failed to score a touchdown in 2 games. And he had double-digit touchdowns in 6 games. And he had a touchdown in every single playoff game that they played last year. So this is a really talented football player, a kid that has some athleticism. I think he's one of those guys that has sort of that gear is going to come when he gets to college and gets in the college strength program. But even now, you see a tall, smooth, athletic kid that can run, has great feet, great vision, knows how to play the position, knows how to run routes, and just dominates. And I don't know what his 40 time is. At this point in time, I really don't care. This kid knows how to play, and he dominates at one of the highest levels in the country. And the film is super impressive, super impressive. So that he'll be on campus next weekend when they play Stanford. He's one of the guys that I know that Jadon Blair, we'll have another story on Jadon Blair coming up, but spoke with Jadon Blair late last week. He's one of the reasons that Jadon's coming back October 12th is because he wants to get to know Jalen Cooper, and Jadon has kind of taken on a little bit of a leadership role in the 2025 class. But this is a guy that I know there's a lot of people at Notre Dame that really like this kid, and they understand there's other guys that are faster, at least now. Not that this kid's slow. Don't get me wrong. Jalen Cooper's not slow. You don't dominate Texas and average like 20 yards a catch if you're slow. It's just he's not like 4.3, 4.4 fast like some people are talking about. But he's a very good athlete, dynamic football player, and just again, sometimes you just got to look. And this is the mistake. You know what it is? Jalen Cooper, to me, is them rectifying the mistake they made with Dalen McCutcheon, where you get too wrapped up in, well, maybe he doesn't have this and he doesn't have this, and you can look past what you may think he doesn't have and ignore the fact this guy's a freaking great receiver. He may not, and you look at the NFL, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of guys dominating in the NFL that you look at and say they weren't combine warriors. They weren't guys that had elite size or elite speed. They just knew they were good athletes and knew how to play. And when I look at Jalen Cooper, I'm like, this kid's, I don't care what his 40 time is. I don't care if it's a 4.5 or 4.6. This kid's playing in Texas in one of the best areas in the country, and he's dominant. And he's doing it against other future college football players. So when I watch that kid's film, I'm like, dude, this guy's a good football player. And I think he's a kid that's got a gear in him. Like I said before, it's like I thought Will Fuller was going to have another gear when he got to college. Now, what I've said was I thought he had another gear. I didn't think he was going to go from a 4.5, which he ran a 4.55 at the opening going into his senior year. And I know that because I was at the opening and they were announcing the 40 times of former players that are now in the NFL, and they announced Will Fuller from where he was in Pennsylvania, who ran I think it was like a 4.53, which is pretty good. Then he went to Notre Dame, went to a 4.32. I thought he'd get down to like mid to high 4.4s. You know what I'm saying? And some guys do that. Not all guys do that. Jalen Cooper strikes me as a guy that as he focuses on football only and gets to college and gets in a strength program, and he's a guy that to me is going to get another gear as a runner. But man, this guy is just a dominant football player, Trevor. It's like if you could get him and Scrap Richardson to go with Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr., all of a sudden I'm like, okay, the process wasn't great, but the end result is pretty flipping good. That's how I feel about those two. And you could make the same case with Isaiah Mizell, but there's a little bit more projection with him because he would kind of be replacing Tanook Hines. And honestly, I kind of like his film a little bit better than Tanook's, to be honest with you. But this kid, to me, if you were able to somehow get Jalen Cooper and Scrap Richardson to go with Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis Jr. and James Flanagan at tight end, all of a sudden I'm not at all worried about and for people that care about rankings, On3 did rank Scrap Richardson. They're the only one that's regraded him since his senior year, and in their most recent rankings, they actually put him into the top 300. And then they have Jalen Cooper just outside the top 100. I graded Jalen Cooper out as a top 100 player, and I grade Scrap Richardson out as a top 250 player. So these are good football. These aren't 3-star projects, in my opinion. These are kids that can come in and help you out early because they bring a different for different reasons, but they're kids that I think can come in and in their first 2 years help you out. In the case of Scrap, and in the case of Jalen Cooper, he's the kind of kid that might be able to come in and help you out day one because of just how advanced he is as a football player.
Jalen Cooper does a lot of things naturally that you like seeing in somebody that is that young. Already you go back and you look at the film, and he's already starting to stack routes. Right, he's already started to stack defenders when he's going deep. To your point, he's not a burner yet. I mean, that could come. Not to say that he's a slow guy, but if you go back through and you watch his film, he naturally does things that you like to see football players do. He's a multi-sport athlete that is also good at football. You look at a guy like Jalen Cooper, and you can tell this guy was put on this earth to play football. Right, he's really good after the catch, which is one common theme that I'm seeing from what Mike Denbrock is looking to bring to South Bend, are guys who are electric after the catch. Not saying that he's taking a look at guys like Malik Neighbors and just saying, hey, let's copy paste that. But he saw how successful it was down in Louisiana, right? So I like Notre Dame going hard after Jalen Cooper. Definitely adds a more dynamic playmaking ability to the wide receiver class. So excited to hear that he's going to be back on campus next week. Is he back?
This will be his first trip. This will be his first trip to campus. Yeah, Jalen Cooper hasn't visited yet. He will be on campus next weekend for the Stanford game.
Okay,
October 12th. So Notre Dame's going on the road the end of this week. They are not hosting anyone this weekend. And a reminder, they flipped Scrap Richardson from South Florida. Isaiah Mizell's committed to Arizona, and Jalen Cooper is he's committed to SMU. So those are the three that right now. There's a couple other kids, and I can't release their names, but there's a couple other kids they're talking to, and including a kid that they had recruited a while ago and fell off of, and they're trying to see if they get back on, that kind of thing. But these are the main guys right now that are kind of out there. I do think that they're going to continue expanding the board, because right now you like where they stand with Jalen Cooper. I think Notre Dame is a major player in that one, major player. But that's different than saying, okay, he's going to pull the trigger and leave the state of Texas. Part of the reason he picked SMU is because he wanted to stay in state. And so that's the hurdle for Jalen Cooper. And we'll see if that can continue or not. But, getting him up on campus next week is big. And, we'll see if they can make that impression. And again, there's, as of right now, Deuce Knight's supposed to be there that weekend as well. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, if he is not flipped by then, that he, the track record will change a little bit for receivers picking Notre Dame the weekends that they visit with Deuce. Hasn't been great so far, but having Jadon Blair and some of the other commits on campus will be big for Notre Dame that weekend as well. So that's where we're at with receiver recruiting right now, Trevor. This is a very important commitment for Notre Dame, getting Antavious Richardson in the class. We broke it down. Love the kid's film. Got a lot to learn, right? I think Ryan said it in the chat. We're going to find out with a kid like this if Mike Brown can develop receivers, because this is a kid that is a developmental player. I don't view him as a project. I personally, and that may be my bias, because I went like from 1 week I'm playing quarterback to the next week I'm playing receiver. And, my whole life I'm playing quarterback. And then as a true freshman, I'm starting at receiver for a top 25, college football team at the level I played at. So I think with a good coach, you can make that move and make that move relatively quickly. But you've got to be someone that knows how to start with the basics with a player. And hopefully Notre Dame will be able to do that. So we'll see how that goes. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to do buy, sell, hold next, folks. But before we do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.